This conference will now be recorded.
So in our previous class, we were discussing about validations, and out of these three validations, we are going for validate rule. So validate rule will be one of the is an instance of rule obj validate, right? And we can able to call this validate rule from activities as well as the flow actions and another validate rule. So this is what we have discussed, and we have discussed about has messages OOTP when condition also, and that with that we will be having some messages validated. So based on that, we can able to go for some conditional execution. So these are all the things. Now we'll work on another thing called edit validate. So before that, let me tell you some advantages and disadvantages with this validate rule. So what are all the advantages? We can able to validate for multiple properties here, okay, and we can able to validate for multiple combinations also. Within multiple properties, we can able to go for multiple combinations. That is advantage. And we can able to validate across the section level, and I can able to validate the same from the flow action, I mean from the activity also. So if I get the chance to run the same validations from the activity, I can able to have one more round of validations. In the first screen, validation is successfully completed, and in between, if I'm trying to override it by mistake or some explicitly, the data has to be validated again. That can be done by running one validate tool from the activity. So there will be one more round of validation that can be performed if we can able to call this from activity. So that's also one advantage. Okay, and the disadvantage here is, what's the disadvantage here? So if I'm trying to just check for the validations for first name, last name, date of birth property, what I will be doing, I'll be including all the necessary property rules in one validate, and I will be calling this validate rule on the flow action. Suppose if I'm trying to use the same properties like first name, last name in my second screen also, then what I have to do in order to validate the same data, I have to call the same validate rule in the second flow action as well, right? So if we want to just validate at least one rule which is there in that particular flow action, we have to call the validate rule again there. Okay, or we have to create new validate rule just to check for the properties, same properties. So that is the disadvantage. Okay, once the properties are given with some conditions, wherever I use those properties, it will not be applicable with this validate rule. So, okay, if I just call it in the flow action, then only if the flow action is having all the properties what I'm trying to look for, if it is having some bad data only, then only it will be validated. So that is one disadvantage, and we can able to call this from many places. This is also we have discussed, and now we'll discuss about next rule called edit validate. So edit validate is also one of the rule where we can able to have validations in our PRPC, and this will be created under data model category, and this will be completely client side. So client side validation meaning before submitting the form. Okay, before clicking on submit button, as soon as I enter the data and tab out, if I want to just get this value to be validated, then we can go for edit validate. So whatever the things we are seeing for mobile number or the email, so if you're not giving proper email ID or the proper mobile number as part of PRPC OOTP validation, it will be automatically showing. So that will be one example of client-side validation. Okay, and if I want to make this validate rule to be executed from the server side also, that is possible. We'll discuss this at the last. So the disadvantage with this validate rule. So let me tell the advantage first. The advantage of this validate rule is it will be directly displayed at the section level. It did not interact with the server. Okay, so if it is not interacting with the server, it can be directly shown in the design level. So automatically there will be less load on the server, right? That is one advantage. And the disadvantage is we should be having one separate validate rule for each and every property. So validate rule can be called across property level only. We can able to call this validate rule with the combination of multiple properties, and we can able to call it from flow action. Okay, but validate rule cannot be called across multiple properties. Each validate rule should be called on each property, and for every property, suppose if I want to just validate for first name property, it should be mandatory and it should not be accepting characters, sorry, letters, or it should not be accepting special characters. So those kind of validations, if you want to apply on one property, so we have to create one edit validate rule and we have to call it. Okay, and if the same validations are to be applied in the second property, the last name, so then also you have to call the same validate rule there also. So for each and every property we have to call one edit validate rule. Okay, So that is disadvantage. Here with one validate rule, what we can able to do, we can able to validate multiple properties at a time. But with this edit validate rule, I cannot able to call this edit validate on the full action or anywhere. I should be calling it on the property level. So each and every property should be given with one validate rule. Okay, so that is one disadvantage. And the advantage here is if I'm just defining one property with one validate rule, and in that validate rule I can able to write many things, that's secondary. And if I'm just having one property with one validate rule, that important advantage here is wherever I use this property, those validations will be applicable. So in the earlier case, when I'm going for first name property, it should not be having any numbers written. So that is my validation. So that should be my requirement. So if I'm trying to implement using validation rule, okay. So in this validation rule, I will be creating one property and there I will be applying some OOTP functions and I will be just validating that data. And this particular validate rule has to be called on the flow action only. Suppose if I'm having the same first name property in my second or third screens. So in that case, what I have to do, if I want to validate the same, I have to again call the same validate rule on the submit button or the flow action in the second screen as well as in the third screen. So that is the disadvantage, right? But now if I'm trying to have this validate rule, edit validate rule, having the same checks, same validation conditions applied and it applied on the property level. Edit validate can be applied across the property level. If I'm defining it at the property level, wherever I am using this property, if you may be using it in the 10 screens, wherever we use this property, automatically all the time the edit validate rule will be applicable. Why? Because we are trying to define it at the property level. Wherever property is used, it will be applicable. So that is the advantage of edit validate. And I'll tell you the disadvantages also. Now let me show you how to create one validate edit validate rule and how to work with those and how to use the conditions within that. This we'll discuss. So edit validate is an instance of rule edit validate. So all the edit validate rules are to be created in one class called rule edit validate. So this will be the instances of rule obj validate, right? Similarly, this will be the instance of rule edit validate. So technically, we'll be calling this as a rule edit validate, and this will be called as a rule obj validate. So if we just call this as validate rule, we may be getting confused whether it is an edit validate or the obj validate. So this call as a rule obj validate, and this will be called as a rule edit validate. Clear, right? So now let me show you how to create one edit validate. And as I told you, we should be calling this on the property level. And let us work on small requirements so that we'll be getting clear idea. There will be many disadvantages with edit validate, I'll tell you. So we'll work on small requirement. So let me open any of the section. So this is our section, right? So here, let me work on one validate rule where date of birth should not be future. So all the time we'll be getting calendar icon, right, for the date of birth, and date of birth, in the date of birth, user should not be entering any of the future date. Only past date should be selected. If by chance is selecting future date, automatically we should be getting the error message without clicking on submit button. Okay, so that is one requirement we'll work on. And age should be within 18 to 60 years only. So he should not be less than 18 or greater than 60. So even that functionality has to be issued using edit validate rule. If I'm trying to do the same, I have to create two different edit validate rules. One has to be applied for the age property and one has to be applied for the date of birth property. But yesterday when we were working with obj obj validate, what we have seen, we can able to have these two functions or these two properties directly included in one rule. Okay, but now I have to create two separate rules and those are to be defined with one different properties. And wherever I use this property, if age property is used in the 4 or 5 screens, all the time this validations will be applicable. Okay, first let me show you how to create one edit validator. And before that, let me show you where can I call the edit validate. If I want to call any of the validate rule, I have to call it across the property level. So just open the control to identify the property. So this is the property. So this property we are getting it from the data class, right? So this is the property what we are using, and we are using the same property in next screen also, nominee screens also. So the same property is being used there also. We can able to see the same conditions applicable there also. And this is the property rule. And in order to apply the validations on the property, we have to go to advanced tab. Under advanced tab, there will be something called use validate. Okay, here we should be creating one new validate rule and we have to define it here. By default, PRPC will be having many OOTB edit validate rules. If you want to create any of the new validate rule, we have to write our own customized Java code. That will be a bit difficult for everyone. Okay, so instead, what we have to do, instead of just to avoid the Java coding, what we'll be doing, we'll be trying to adjust the same by using some OOTB edit validate rules. So these are all the OOTB edit validate rules. If you want to just check for alphabetic validation, we can able to go for this. Or if you want to just check for any of the things like is a number or a content space. Okay, what are the thing you want, you can able to just identify the thing based on the name. Suppose if you want to see the Java code, as I told you, if you want to write our own customized code, so there will be cases where we have to write our own customized. For sure, everything cannot be met. Suppose let me select this OOTP, and if I want to just check for the Java code, open this. What we can able to see, we can able to see some Java code here. If you want to write anything with respect to your project, any customized thing, you have to write your own Java code. Okay, then only edit validation rule will be applicable. Now, as I told you, writing of Java code will be a bit difficult. Even I cannot able to write much perfectly. But our requirements will not be met by PRPC all the time. So here, my requirement here is age property should be within 18 and 60. So if PRPC is creating one OOTB property for this, then my requirement might be changed to 20 to 45 age, right? So if I'm in a requirement to have the age between 20 to 45, then so in that case, what we have to do is we have to identify the similar kind of OOTB edit validate rule. So for each and everything, there will be some similar kind of OOTB validates. Okay. So if we can be able to get the exact OOTB rules, you can able to blindly use those. If you're not finding anything, we have to identify the similar kind of thing. We have to open the Java and we have to make minor modifications there. Okay, so in our two requirements we can simply say date of birth should be either future or past. If you want to select any of the future or past date, for sure there should be some OOTB. Why? Because this is very generic, so you might be using this or any person in other project also might be using this. But age property, my requirement will be different and some other person's requirement will be different. So in this kind of things I cannot able to have anything OOTB, but this seems to be very strict. We can able to identify OOTB. So let us identify the OOTB for date of birth and let us identify the similar validate rule for the age, and let me make the modifications for that. So I'm just trying to open the date of birth property. And if you want to make any modifications on the locked rule set, what we have to do, we have to save as this into latest version. So date of birth has been created in the version number 1, which is completely locked off. And if you want to make any modifications, what we have to do, we have to save as this into our latest rule set, then only we have to make modifications. I'm creating it in the version number 2. Create and open. So you click on OK, no problem. So we'll be getting this date of birth created in the version number 2, and here we have to make modifications. So modifications here to be like adding one validate rule, right? So here my requirement here is it should not be accepting future date. So for that, let me let me identify the appropriate one. So there should be something like date DMMDDYY. So if we select this, date of birth should be, date should be of that format. Okay. So these are all OOTB. We can able to explore most of the things here. So if it is a blank, if it is a boolean, or if the dot exists, if is a future date. So this is something like, right? So if I select this future date, so this is something seems to be appropriate here. I'm saving this. Okay. So if you want to see the Java code, we can able to see, but we may not understand. So I'm just closing this, and let me close the version number 1 also. So this seems to be a bit appropriate. I'm saving it now. So let me create the new work object ID. So date of birth is an future date. So that is what we have selected, right? So I'm trying to select future date. So it is not throwing any error. Let me select the past date. What are we getting? So meaning this particular function will be just checking whether it is future or not. If it is future, it is acceptable. So that is what we are saying. But here, if I use this function, this will be acting like a negation, right? This will be accepting only future date. Okay. Suppose if you want to join anywhere, so if you want to select the date, you should not be having the word previous date selected there. Then you have to use this function. But now my requirement here is user should not be allowed to enter the future dates. For that I have to select some more things. I mean other validate rule. So there should be something like past date also. That is my expectation. So these are all things you can able to explore. Not future date. See, we can able to have something like not future date. So submit and save this. If we refresh this, let me select future date first. We are getting the error message, right? So it is getting highlighted and it is throwing error message. Yesterday, if you want to achieve the same using other validation tool, what we have to do after selecting value, it might be either good value or bad value. So error message will be displayed on clicking on submit button only. But now by just entering the value, it will be throwing the error. Okay, you need not refresh the section or you need not do anything. So this will be done across the property level. And if you observe, we cannot able to give any customized error messages. Okay, this symbol and this will be completely OOTP. Even if you're trying to write some extra code also, so these kind of things cannot be possible. But if you want to change it, we can able to do that. I'll show you. Okay, so this is one of the advantage. Suppose if I am using the same date of birth property in some other screens, even then it will be working fine. Why? Because we are trying to define it across the property level. Wherever we are using this property, it might be used in the customer details page or the nominee details page or any other page. Ultimately this property should be default. So we are defining the same validate rule in this advanced tab. So that is the reason it will be applicable wherever we are using this. So this seems to be advantage here, right? And if I'm having some other kind of date of birth, sorry, other kind of calendar icon to be selected here, what I have to do? So this is date of birth and there is some other property like date of joining. So there also I have to select some date. What I have to do, I should not be allowing user to enter past dates. So there you have to go for another validate rule and that property should be defined with that validate rule. So meaning each and every validate rule should be defined. So each and every property should be defined with one validate rule. But in the previous case, that is with obj validate, within one validate rule, I can able to have multiple combination of properties. But here one validate rule will be having only one property. If you want to use the same edit validate in some other place also, you have to call it, you have to define it there again. Okay, so our first requirement is completed. So the first thing is we should not be making user to enter future dates. Let me select any of the past date, it will be accepting. So if we select any of the future date, it has to throw error. Okay, so in this way we can able to identify the OOTP edit validates and we can able to simply make use of this. Wherever we use this, it will be automatically called there. Now second thing, our next requirement here is age should be, so we can able to select any of the age here. So age should not be less than 18 and should not be greater than 60. So my requirement here is it should be 18 to 60 only. So in that case 18 and 65 is number seems to be specific to our project. So other projects might be having something like 20 to 70 also. Okay, in that case PRPC cannot able to meet each and everyone's requirement. So there will not be any OOTB validate applicable for that. That's for sure. Okay, so in that case what we have to do? So we have to create one new validate rule and we have to apply it here. So creation of validate rule is not that easy. Just now we have seen, right? It will be having Java code included. Okay. So now how to achieve this? So as discussed, in order to achieve anything, in order to identify the appropriate validate rule, we have to just identify the nearest thing one. Suppose my requirement here is I will be entering some number. The number has to be compared with some other number. Okay, if user is entering 16 as an age, that particular number has to be compared with my boundary value like 18 or 65. So meaning I have to compare one number with another number. So let me identify any of the OOTP validate is there or not for that. So is a number or is something like an compare numbers. So if I just have anything identifier nearest to this, then I can able to open that and make the minor modifications inside. Okay, so I'm trying to identify something close to this. So is integer, I can able to just go for this is integer also, meaning customer can able to enter negative values also. So this might not be appropriate one. So if there are no anything other appropriate, we'll try to use that one. Okay, so I'm trying to just check whether there is anything similar to this. Is non-negative, which might be useful, and is non-negative integer, this also might be useful. So let me select this. See, is non-negative integer meaning age should be from 0. Okay, from it will be user cannot able to enter negative values. So this seems to be bit nearest to my requirement. For that, let me open this and identify the Java code. So if there are any restrictions, I can able to apply. So this is the existing Java code. So if you want to write any new Java code, it may not be suitable for each and everyone. So in that case, I'm trying to open the nearest one, and in this, what they're trying to do. So check if value is not negative. So whatever the value we're getting it as part of this validate rule, it will be just checking whether it is negative or not. Meaning if it is less than 0, it is throwing error. Okay, if it is less than 0, it is throwing error. So whatever the value we are entering, it will be picked up from the clipboard and they are comparing it value less than 0. Okay, now my requirement here is whatever the value that customer is entering, that will be updated in the clipboard, and the clipboard value has to be compared with less than 18. Clear, right? If I just compare the value with less than 18, then automatically whatever the thing it is trying to do as part of input value less than 0, the same thing it will be doing in our requirement also. So we have to be cautious how to identify the nearest validate tool to that, and based on that we can able to make the modifications. So here I'll show you how to make the modifications and how to add the error messages. So are we finding anything like error message? Suppose if I want to use this same edit rule as it is for the age property, what it has to do, if it is entered with the negative values only, it has to throw some error saying like only positive numbers should be entered or so. Even we cannot able to see the error message now, only in the real time, only in the output, real output we can able to see. So that error message cannot be customized and we should be using what they're defining. That's it. But now I'll show you how to create one new validate rule and how to update the Java code here and how to write the extra validation messages. Okay, so in order to make modifications to this, let me open age property. Understanding, right? Any doubts? Getting confused anywhere?
Chandra.
Clear now? Good. Tulani, you also?
Yes, Chandra. Clear.
Okay, so we are done with this date of birth. I'm closing this. So I think I did not. Okay. So this seems to be the nearest one for that. So I have created in the second version, latest version. So is non-negative integer is the thing what we have identified. So I'm selecting this. And in order to make the modifications, let me open this. Okay, this is already open. And to make modifications on any rule which is logged, it is not possible. Let me save as this into my latest rule set. So PRPC has to pick the latest one, right? So if I'm trying to request for a rule from the version number 2, it has to just check for the corresponding rules in the latest version, that is 2. If no rules are identified only, it will be going to the previous version. Okay. So we have saved as into our version. So now we have to make the modifications. So the thing here is earlier it was 0. So whatever the value that customer is entering as part of age or anything, that value has to be passed here and it will be compared with the 0 value. If it is 0, it is trying to throw some error. But now my requirement here is I should be making this age property to be validated with a number like 18 or 60. So are we finding anything like age property here or any of the clipboard property? We are not finding anything. So all the time, if I'm trying to use this particular validate rule across age property, or if I'm trying to use it somewhere like salary or amount, so anywhere I can able to use this, right? So wherever I'm trying to use this, it should be working. So that is the reason if I'm trying to use it across age property, then the value will be automatically changed to age. Okay, so from clipboard, age property will be picked up and it will be assigned to the value. Okay, and here from here the value will be assigned to I input, and from here I input value is getting compared. If I'm using the same edit validate rule across one property like amount, what it has to do, the value will be compared, I mean the value will be updated with an amount value. Okay, from clipboard the property will be updated, will be assigned to the value, and it will be assigning back to I input, and based on this I input it will be comparing. So this will be written very generic. Because of the reusability, it should be written generic. So that is the reason we will not be having anything hard coded with any properties. So the value is important. If I'm using it as across age, the value will be age, and if I'm using it somewhere, the value will be updated from there. So finally, if age is entered, it will be having it in I input. So if I input is less than 18, okay, so if user is entering 16 as the age, if 16 is less than 18, okay, then what I have to do, I have to show some error message. So validation should be done and it should not be making user to go to the next screen. So that is the reason I'm trying to just check with age 18. Okay, and now I have to add some error message. So saying like minors are not allowed or people with less than 18 should not be allowed. So these kind of error messages should be displayed. For that we have to go for one OOTB function called add, sorry, so the property dot add message. So this is completely case sensitive. You have to type as it is. Minors are not allowed. Okay. So if I define it like this, what it has to do, input value will be passed here into the, and that will be passed to I input, and I input will be compared with 18. If it is less than 18 only, this if loop will be executed and it has to show some error message. So this is the OOTB function for showing error message. If it is greater than 18, it will be executed. I mean, this loop will not be executed and there will not be any error message shown. So it will be returning true value to the edit property. Clear, right? Let me save this. So we have created the latest, we have created in the latest version, and now let me call that validate rule. Okay, I'm giving the same number, right? So let me save as this with the other name. Okay, so I'm saving it to the latest version. Let me call the validate rule here, validate age. So select this and save it. So this I can close. So let me refresh. So if I'm selecting age as 10, I'm not getting. If I click on submit, what is the error message I'm getting? So did we get any error message now? So minors are not allowed. Okay. So why did we get this error message on tab out? As I told you, edit validate rules are to be applicable whenever we tab out. On clicking on submit button, it will be acting like a server validation. But my requirement is to add the edit validate rule to to validate it at the design level only. But here we are trying to execute some customized Java. Here, if we just tab out, automatically PRPC will be executing the it will be executing this refresh automatically. But now since we are writing some extra Java code, this will not be refreshed. So that is the reason we have to add refresh for this. So I'm trying to do it directly from here. Let me add it from the section then. Clear? Any doubts so far? So let me add the refresh for the age property. Let me log off and log in. Something. So here, if I just add the refresh property, I'm expecting that it should be working. On change, refresh the section. So I'm submitting this and save it. Now run the new work object ID. So let me enter some value like 1. So are we getting any error message directly? Clear, right? So if you are going some for OOTB functions where you are not going to validate some extra Java code, then you need not refresh the thing. So if you want to have this updated, if you want to get this error messages validated on refresh, I mean on changing, then we have to make PRPC to validate the Java code by refreshing the section. That is the thing we have to add the refresh here. Clear? Now let me enter some meaningful value like 40, 55. So you're not getting any error message. Okay, clear? I'm entering something like 88. Even this is taking. Why it is taking? My requirement is to put it like an 18 to 60 only, but it is still considering. Why? Because we have applied only condition for less than 18 only. We have not applied any condition for greater than 65. So we have to work on that. So for that, we need not create separate validate rule. We can check for the same thing here. So here input value, if it is less, if it is age property some value, it will be compared with the 18. And suppose if it is greater than 60, let me check that condition also. So I'm just copying and pasting it here. So if it is greater than 61, I'll be accepting 60 also. Okay, if it is greater than 61. So senior citizens are not allowed. Okay, I'm saving it. So let me refresh this. So I'm entering something like 99. Tab out. We're getting the error message, right? If I'm entering something like 60, so you're not getting. Let me enter 18. 18 is also acceptable. Let me enter 17. So you're getting error messages. Okay. So minors are not allowed and majors are not allowed. So meaning both these things are executed successfully. On tab out, this particular Java message has to be executed. Sorry, Java code has to be executed, and based on this value, it has to be either executing this one or this one. If both are not being executed, it will be validating the true value. It will be giving the true value. So meaning there should not be any error message displayed. Okay. So the thing what we can able to understand with this edit validate here is we should be writing our own Java code. So that is one disadvantage. And other disadvantage here is we cannot able to have the combination of properties. So within one rule, did we find any combination of properties? Combination of properties will not be possible. Why? Because the value, I mean this particular parameter has to accept only one parameter, sorry, one property value at a time. So that is the reason validate rule can be used for only one property at a time. Within one property, we can able to go for multiple conditions. That is possible, but for multiple properties, it is not possible. So that is disadvantage. So the advantage here is wherever I use this property, validation rule will be applicable. And the disadvantage here is I should be having each and every property defined with one separate validate rule, and I cannot able to have the combination of properties. Combination of conditions is possible, But with validator rule, obj validator rule, we can able to go for combination of properties as well as combination of conditions. But here combination of properties is not defined. There I can able to call multiple properties within one rule, but here each property for one rule. I mean each property each rule. Clear? Any doubts so far? So likewise, we can able to just check for the multiple conditions. We can just make use of all this. If you are not identifying any of the thing which is nearer to that, just identify the appropriate one, and based on that we can able to add some extra Java code on top of this. Any doubts? Understood both of you?
Yes, Chandra.
Uma? Uma, clear, right? So this error
Yeah,
message has to
clear.
be
Yeah,
as it
clear,
is.
Chandra. Yeah, clear.
Okay, yeah, okay. So this syntax has to be followed as it is. Even in other validator rule, you cannot able to find the error messages. What they are already defining, we have to go for that only. And if you want to write some extra Java, sorry, you want to write some extra customized code, customized error messages, we have to use this and we have to define it in this brackets. Then only this will be displayed. So this is how we can able to work with validate rules. Now I'll ask you one question. Okay, we have just discussed whenever we just tab out, or if you're just working with any property, whatever the value we enter there, on tabbing out, Java code has to be executed and it has to show the error messages, right? So that is what we are seeing for this. Okay, now you have to answer me one thing. So here we are using for Java code, meaning it is interacting with the server. So is this server validation or the client side validation? So I told you edit validate rule is a client side validation. Okay, now here we are trying to make it executed by writing some Java code. Okay, but even then we should not be calling this as a server side. So this is client side validation. Okay, so on just tabbing out or doing any kind of things, whatever the thing we're trying to do from HTML. So this is HTML part, right? So if we're trying to enter some values on tabbing out, what it will be doing, it will be generating some Ajax code. Based on this Ajax code, it will be converting Java code into client side validation. Okay, so you should not be calling this as a server side validation. So this is 100% client side validation only. Without clicking on submit button only, we are getting this. Clear? If at all, if you want to make this edit validate rule to act as a client side, sorry, server side, even that is possible. So that part has to be yet to be discussed. But as of now, if I ask you this question, even though we are using Java code, it should not be acting like a server. It should be acting like an 100% client side validations. Okay. So there will be one thread what we have discussed yesterday. Suppose in the first screen, if I want to validate all the properties, I can able to go for either edit validate or the obj validate. So with obj validate, if I just call it across the flow action, okay, automatically on clicking on submit button, it has to interact with the Java and it has to just show the error messages based on the input. So we'll be making user to enter the correct data only. Okay, and similarly, instead of I going for edit validate, what we can able to do, we can directly go for, so instead of going for obj validate, we can directly go for edit validate also. Using this edit validate also, I can able to make user to enter the appropriate data. Okay, both are possible, but at the last, I mean, if you want to interact with the database and if you want to again cross check the data, okay, for that what we have seen yesterday, we'll be calling this flow action rule. So we'll be calling this validate rule from the flow action, where it will not be, so where it will be again cross checking there. Okay, so if there is any case where we are trying to modify the data from other source, apart from entering the data directly from here, if I just enter some dummy data, if I just enter some correct data and click on submit button, okay, it will be going to the next screen having the correct data in the clipboard. And with some ways I'm trying to update the data in the clipboard. Suppose if I'm trying to update the date of birth to future date using some property set or the data transform or anything, so that is possible. Okay, that is possible. So in that case, if you want to store all this data at a time in the bulk to some database or to some other web services, validation will be, I mean, errors will be coming. So to avoid that, what we're trying to do, we can able to call this obj validate rule from the activities. What it will be doing, it will be again cross checking whether the data that has been in the clipboard is valid or not. Apart from this one level of checking, if I want to have this validated from there also, we can able to do that. Okay, and similarly with the obj valid, with the edit validate as well. So if I'm just entering some dummy data, if I'm entering some correct data here, on clicking on submit button, what it has to do, it has to just check whether it is corrected data or not. If it is corrected data only, it will be going to the next screen and putting it in the clipboard. Suppose if I'm trying to update the same value in clipboard with some dummy data, so there is no responsibility of this controller. There is no responsibility of this edit validate rule. It has to be validated only on the property level. And if you're trying to update the same value in some other means, it is not its mistake. Clear, right? It is not this mistake. So if I can able to make this validate rule to be called from activity, then our requirement, then our threat will be gone. Okay, if I'm trying to call this validate, any of the validate rule from flow action or the activity, that will be 100% server side. So that is what we have discussed when working with obj validate rule. Obj validate rule will be validated when it's interacting with the database as well as when it is interacting with the activity. So activity in turn is a automated Java code, right? So it has to interact with the Java. So obj validate is purely server side. Now as of now we are seeing this edit validate as an 100% client side, and if I want to validate the same data using activities before saving it or before doing some business performance, what I have to do, I should be in a position to call these validate rules, edit validate rules from the activities also. Okay, so if that is the case, if I want to call this edit validate rule on one property from activity, then I can able to have the recheck of the validated data. And in that case, so wherever we are going for activities, it is 100% pure Java. Okay, if I'm trying to call this edit validate rule from Java, then this particular edit validate rule will be acting like in server side. Okay, what I'm trying to say is I can able to have this edit validate rule called from activities also. So in that case, this edit validate rules will be acting like a server side validation. So by default, this will be acting like a client side validation. Even though if it is having Java code design, it will be 100% client side. And if at all, if I want to have this particular edit validate to be called from activities, then during runtime, Java will be executed as part of activities, and this validate rule will be considered as an server side validations. Okay, rule obj validate is purely server, and this will be acting like in both client as well as the server side validation. We can able to call this validate rule from activities also by using methods called property validate and page validate. Clear as of now? Let me open any activity and tell you. So let me create something. So I can able to have two methods. So that is property validate So property validate is one method where I can able to validate the property using edit validate. So if I just open this, so if I want to run the obj validate using activities, we will be going for obj validate. That's the name of the method. Now if I want to go for single property to be validated using edit validate rule, we have to go for property validate. So we can able to go for edit property validate or page validate. So what property validate will be doing? Both are of edit validations only, not the obj validations. So what property validate will be doing? It will be validating single property. By the name itself, we can able to understand. So it will be validating single property, and it has to validate its corresponding edit validate what is defined. So that is what we can able to understand as of now. And page property. What is page property doing? So if at all I have multiple properties on one page, so what are all the edit validate rules defined on the advanced tab of that particular page will be validated here again. Okay, suppose if I'm trying to go for validate rule, so we have to select the property. I'm selecting something like age property. So if I'm giving something like is, so what are the OOTB edit validates we are getting there, we have to get it here also. So I'm selecting something like is future date or is blank. So this seems to be a bit appropriate here. So if I run this property validate method, what it has to do? It has to do, it has to run this activity, and here it has to just check for the age property, and it has to execute, it has to make this particular validate rule applicable. Although this age property has been given with one edit validate rule in the advanced tab. In the advanced tab, as per the advanced tab, it has to validate whether the age is between 18 to 60. Okay, and if I'm trying to use this age property directly within section, what it has to do, based on the input, it has to validate whether the age is between 18 to 60. So that is the thing what we have discussed. Suppose if I'm trying to call the same property from activity, and if I'm here also, I can able to select the edit validate rules, right? We can able to select validate age property what we have, validate age validation to what we have created, or I can able to validate with some other edit validate rules also. So here I'm trying to just use is blank. What PRPC has to check? So if I run this particular property value has to be checked whether that is blank or not. Okay, so this will be given the highest priority. So whatever the validation rule we are defining at the age property in the advanced tab, that will be completely neglected. So if we define anything like age between 16 to 18 to 60, that will not be calculated. Only here it will be calculated whether the age is blank or not. So this is of highest priority. Okay, and if you want to have this validated with the advanced tab, then we have to go for either property created in the section, or we have to go for page validate. Okay, you understood about this property validate, right? Now let me show you how can we use page validate. So page validate, by the name itself, we can able to validate whole page. Suppose I'm giving any step name, step page here. So if I just open it, it will not be asking any of the property names. Here we have some options to select the properties. But here in the page validate, we are not having any option to select the properties. The specialty here is it will be asking for the page name. So whatever the page name we define, so in that page, if I have 10 to 15 properties, let us say 10 properties. Okay, and within these 10 properties, if I have 5 properties defined with the advanced tab, with the validation rule in the advanced tab. Okay, and the 5 properties are not defined with any of the validate rule in the advanced tab. Now, if I run this particular activity as part of this page validate, what it has to do, it has to validate all the properties which are defined on this page. All the properties meaning what are all the properties defined with some edit validate rule in the advanced tab, only those will be executed, those will be validated. Okay, out of 10 rules, only 5 rules are given with advanced tab edit validate rule, and that validation rules will be applicable for all the 5 properties. So if the data is correct or not, it will be validating here. So rest of the 5 properties where there is no validate rule defined, it will be ignoring. Okay, so that is the importance of page validate. So with the property validate, what we can able to do, we can able to, although whatever the validate rule, whatever the validate has been given in the advanced tab of this particular property, that will be not given any priority. Why? Because it is asking us to select some other value here, and whatever the thing we are selecting, it will be validated only with this value. For the page property, the case is different. It will be validating only the validations what we are defining in the advanced tab of that particular properties. Okay, if the page is having the properties, it should, for sure it will be having properties, and the properties are defined with any of the advanced tab validate rule, only those will be validated. So at a whole, I can able to validate the multiple properties with its corresponding validation rules defined in the advanced tab. Rest all the rules which are not defined with the advanced tab will be completely ignored. Okay, why? Because we manually saying that there is no validation required for the property. So that is the reason we are not defining anything in the advanced tab, right? The same thing page validate also will be doing. Clear? So any doubts? So in this case, if I'm trying to go for property validate or page validate, okay, so our properties has to be validated by running one activity, meaning running by Java. So in this case, if I'm trying to have validate rule, edit validate rules to be executed using property validate or page validate, so those kind of validations will be 100% server side validations. So the same validate rule, if the same edit validate rule is being called across the section level, that will be 100% client side. So edit validate is the only rule which will be acting like on both client side as well as the server side. Obj validate is purely server side, and the next thing what we're trying to discuss like constraints will be client side. So you understood? Any doubts? So let me tell you quickly. Let me give a quick recap. So obj validate rule can able to have multiple properties defined, and we can able to have multiple combinations also, and we can able to call this validate rule from flow action or the activity or another validate rule. Okay, so this is 100% server side, and we should be using some OOTB functions within that. I cannot able to write some extra Java code, I mean extra code there. So we have to select the functions, OOTB functions. And the disadvantage here is wherever I use this, suppose if I'm using the same properties in some other screen, that will not be applicable there. Okay. So on clicking on submit button only, if the page is having the properties defined, then those will be validated, else it will not be validated. And in comparison with the edit validate rule is an instance of rule edit validate, and it will be acting like on both client side as well as the server side, and we have to write our own customized Java code here, and that is the reason a obj validate rule will be used very widely in comparison with edit validate rules. Obj validate rule will be used very widely. And the other advantage is we can able to have this edit validate rule acting like a client side as well as the server side. Okay, and if you're trying to write some extra Java code, we have to refresh the thing. Okay, any doubts? Clear? Getting confused anywhere? So do you want me to explain anywhere, or shall we continue with the next topic?
Yeah, continue.
Okay. So this is all about validate rule and edit validate rule. Next we'll discuss about constraints. So constraints is also one of the rule where we can able to apply some error messages. So ultimately the purpose of validations is to throw some error messages only, no? Based on the conditions, it has to throw some error messages. The same thing can be done using activity also, like property set messages or the page set messages. And if you want to validate the rules, we can able to validate using obj validate or property validate or page validate. So ultimately the purpose of this is to show some error messages. And now we can able to achieve the same using one more rule called constraints. So constraints is a rule which will be acting like a client side 100%, and this can be created under decision category. Under decision category, there will be something called constraints. So the important advantage or the specialty with this constraint rule is we need not refer it anywhere. Okay, once the rule has been created, we need not refer it. Suppose if I'm trying to create one validate rule, obj validate or edit validate, what I have to do? I have to define some properties within that, and or I have to write some extra Java code in that, and that particular validate rule has to be called across flow action level or across property level. So meaning I'm trying to define the validate rule as well as I'm trying to refer it somewhere. If I'm not referring it at the flow action, obj validate rule will not be used, cannot be used. And if I'm not trying to refer this particular rule in this particular property, we cannot able to make use of this. Okay, so this is the thing. But now the specialty of this constraint rule, the specialty of this constraint rule is we can just define it, we need not refer it. So let us work on one small requirement. Based on that we can able to get the clear idea. So I think only this is a section pending. So my requirement here is if the customer is going for domiciliary, user can able to go for either domiciliary or the hospitalization, right? So if the user is going for domiciliary, I should be allowing to enter the amount of 10,000 only. So he should not be claiming for amount more than 10,000. Okay, and if he's going for hospitalization, he should not be claiming the amount for more than 10 lakhs. Okay, so this is the real-time example. In the domiciliary or the hospitalization, we should not be claiming for more than 10,000 if it is in domiciliary, and if he is getting hospitalized, he will be getting at the max of 10 lakh rupees per year. Okay, so this is our requirement. So if he's selecting, if he's going for domiciliary, and if he's trying to enter some 20,000 or 30,000, so that should not be allowed. We have to show some error message based on the conditions. So that is our requirement, and for that I'm trying to create one constraint rule. We can able to do this using obj validate or the edit validate also. I'm trying to go for constraint. So can we go for edit validate for this? Obj validate I can able to go. Why? Because we can able to have combination of properties. But with edit validate I cannot able to have combination of properties, right? So that is the reason we can able to achieve the same using constraints or edit obj validate. So let me create one constraint rule. Validate amount. So click on create and open. So this is how validate rule will be looking like. So it will be just checking for one condition, and it will be just asking for the other property value. So ultimately what we can able to understand, with this constraint rule I can able to have combination of two properties. That's it. Suppose my requirement here is if the treatment type is domiciliary, so if the claiming type is domiciliary, treatment amount should not cross 10,000. So that is the thing I'm trying to select. If is domiciliary is equal to true. Okay, if domiciliary is equal to true, what is that required? I require domiciliary dot amount, insured amount is less than or equal to 10,000. This is the thing what I'm trying to require. Okay, so if domiciliary is equal to true, I require amount should be less than or equal to 10,000. So let me add some error message. Amount should be less than or equal to 10,000. This is what I'm giving. So this has to be displayed on which property? On the amount property, right? It should not be displayed on the checkbox. It should be displayed on the amount property. So that is what I'm selecting. Okay, so now if I save this, so I'm saving it. Now as I told you, I'll be just creating these rules. I need not refer it anywhere. That is the important thing. So let me create, that's it. Or let me refresh. Okay, let me create one new thing. So if it is of domiciliary and if the amount is more than 10,000, so we're not getting. Okay, so for that we have to go for refresh. So for constants we have to go for refresh. So let me save as this into, sorry, let me save as this into my latest version to make modifications. So add refresh. Similarly, let me add refresh here also at a time. So just refresh this. So if it is of domiciliary and if amount is more than 10,000, what is the error message I'm getting? Amount should be less than or equal to 10,000. Okay, so this is 100% client side validation. So the thing what you have to understand here is by defining constraint rule, that is enough. We need not refer it anywhere. Okay, how it is working as part of the declarative network. We'll discuss about declarative rules tomorrow. And now this is my first requirement. And second requirement, what I should be doing, if it is greater than, sorry, if it is going for hospitalization. So for that, add one more thing. Is hospitalization is equal to true. Hospitalization dot insured amount. What I require it should be less than 10 lakhs. Okay. And what should be the error message? You can able to give some customized error message onto the property. Okay. Save this. That's it. We just refresh. We need not call it or refer it. We need not refer it anywhere. So I'm going for hospitalization now, and I'm trying to enter amount more than 10 lakhs. Tab out. So we're getting the same error message, right? So if we just go for domiciliary parallelly, tab out. So we're getting both error messages. Clear, right? So the important thing here is wherever I use these properties. So if we just go for insured amount in 10 different screens, okay, so all the time it will be working for the same. So as per the clipboard, it will be just checking whether insurance policy type is, sorry, claiming type is domiciliary or not. If it is domiciliary, if this value is getting changed, then this constraint rule will be automatically executed. We'll discuss much detail about declarative rules. So this is one of the rule under declarative network. So how PRPC will be working this, will be making this to work. Either edit validate or the obj validate will be working since we are calling on the particular rules. But here we are not calling this any of the rule. We are not calling on any of the rule. How PRPC will be monitoring these values? PRPC has, there will be one declarative network within PRPC. So that network will be continuously monitoring whatever the properties we are defining. Okay, so that will be continuously monitoring this amount property and this amount property. So by chance, if this amount property is getting updated, automatically declarative network will be triggered, and it will be triggering this declarative constraint rule, and based on that this error message has to be shown. Okay, so the advantage with edit validate rule and the declarative constraints is wherever we use the property, automatically we can able to have this thing what we are creating it now. Okay, so this will be one of the biggest advantage, and this will be the disadvantage also. Suppose out of 100 screens, if you don't want to have any error message in the last screen, then you can't avoid that. Why? Because it has to monitor the same property all the time. If the value is getting changed, declarative network has to be executed, and it has to trigger the rule, and it has to just check for the properties. So declarative network will be continuously monitoring this property and this property. But other rules like edit validate or obj validate, that has to be monitored by the change, I mean by the usage of the particular thing from where we are calling. So if I'm trying to call this particular edit validate rule from the property, so based on the property value getting changed, we can able to load the particular data validate, sorry, edit validate. So there is some link there, but here we are not giving any link. So it will be just monitoring these property values. If the values are getting changed, declarative network will be monitoring, and it will be continuously looking for the data. If it is getting changed as per this condition, it has to show the error messages. Clear? So this all about validations. So declarative constraint is a 100% client-side validation, and OBJ validate rule is 100% server side, and middle one, that is edit validate, can act like a client side as well as the server side. Okay, so declarative constraints will be having a combination of only one property. I can able to have combination of only one property, but with OBJ validate, I can able to go for multiple properties with multiple conditions. With edit rule, I can able to go for only single property with multiple conditions. But with constraints, I can able to go for combination of only two properties. So there should be one when condition property, and there should be one required property. So there should be one combination. So here on a whole, what we can able to discuss, we can able to validate for more than a rule, more than one property at a time here. But with validate, edit validate, we cannot able to validate more than one property. But with OBJ validate, we can able to validate more than one property there. Okay, and with OBJ validate, we should be going for OOTB functions, and with edit validate, we have to write out Java code. but with constraints. We have to just define the property and its conditions. Okay, and obj validate rule will not be applicable everywhere. Wherever we are calling onto the particular flow action only, these rules will be applicable. But with edit validate and the declare constraints, wherever I'm trying to define the rule, or where I'm trying to use the property, automatically it will be applicable there. Okay, here it will be applicable using a declarative network, and in the edit validate it will be applicable as per the property usage. Why? Because we're trying to call that particular edit validate there, right? So that is the thing. Okay, clear so far? So this is all about declarative rules. In tomorrow's class, we'll just discuss importance of declarative network and what are all the rest declarative rules, and we'll be discussing about declare expression. Then after we'll discuss about declare on change. Then we'll discuss about declare trigger, declare index. So okay, clear? Clear, right? Yeah. Okay, then we'll meet tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
My also clear, no?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.